Sometimes I think I glimpse eternally. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to more than I can reach. I'm strong when I am on your shoulder. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me you raise me up to more than I can be. I am strong. I'm strong when I'm on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. Me. You raised me up. You raised me up. You raised me up. You raised me. You raised me up to more, so much more than I can be.
This has been a really special week at All Souls. We had a guest come in, someone who this congregation has gotten to know over the last few years, Dr. Willie Parker, who many know is someone who stands up for reproductive justice. He is an abortion provider. He's an itinerant abortion provider who goes around to some of the places where women have the hardest time accessing this medical procedure. Those who often need it the most, those who are women living in poverty, women in the South. So he's an incredible person who has worked with our men's group and been spoken from this pulpit. He was here, and so we had a fantastic conversation. Reverend Barbara Prose, Bishop Carlton Pearson, and myself, and Dr. Willie Parker over dinner when he was in town. And I said, let's come into the sanctuary, let's sit down, and let's just roll the tape. And let's have a conversation like this for other people to sit in and listen into. It's a conversation about faith, it's a conversation about race, and it's a conversation about America and the conditions that we're in. I believe you're going to really find this conversation fascinating. We had to pare it down to just the highlights, so we're going to post the full conversation online. But I want you to hear these highlights, especially Bishop Carlton Pearson and Dr. Parker, whose faith has changed significantly over the course of their lives, how those changes came about and how those changes impacted them. It begins with the words of Bishop Carlton Pearson.
My first experience was believing God for my 53-year-old grandmother to survive cancer. And she was a woman of faith. Her daughter, my mother, was a woman of faith. Her father, my great-grandfather, Papa, and she died. And that was my first crisis in faith. I had fasted 3 days as a kid, for her to live. I didn't speak of it, but it was traumatized. So faith has always had some drama and trauma involved in it. Drama when it happened, trauma when it failed.
My religious understanding of my faith, when I kicked patriarchy out of it, meant that I had a moral imperative and that it was right and just for me to honor women's abilities to control their fertility, to include abortion or ending of pregnancy as an act of conscience and of a loving resolution to the situation that they found themselves in.
So as somebody who was not taught any dogmas or creeds, I was left to discover God on my own. And I had already, as a very young woman, rejected the patriarchy and our models of extraction capitalism. So for me, the experience of the divine was felt through the earth and through women's bodies and through service as a midwife to the act of bringing forth life. Right? I used to call being a midwife and attending a birth being knee deep in mystery. Right? I was in the presence of the life force itself. So I see no separation between spirit and matter, and feel that's the way of the embodied divine feminine, which is also a presence that's making itself known today with these crises that we're facing. So for me, midwifery was my first step towards a God that I could understand, a God that I could see myself in, a God that was always connected to all of creation, to all of humanity, a God from which no being, no part of creation can ever withdraw from, right? Because we're embedded in this reality. So it's so interesting, I think, from opposite ends of spectrums, how we travel towards a truth that can hold all of us.
Could you say a word about how your faith is held up by your history?
My ancestors went through a pandemic of white supremacy and being commodified as property. That's how the people from which I originate came here. And for them, the religion that was used to domesticate them and to subordinate them, the spirit of truth allowed them to find a hope in identifying with if there was a God who could liberate and enslave people from slavery in Egypt, they found identity with those people, and that God is a God of justice, and if God is on the side of the oppressed, or God, as I understand, would liberate them. They had to have, for them, faith was the substance of things hoped for, liberation and freedom, and it was the substance of things unseen. They had no reason. It was the evidence and the substance of things unseen. They had no reason, and for many of them, if they lived, most of them died while slavery played out for over 250-something years. In the first part, they had no reason to see it, to believe that anything was going to be different. Right. And yet, I represent the hope of some captured African. When I sometimes look up at the moon, and I say this not for dramatic effect, I look up and I realize that I'm looking at the same moon that my ancestors slaved under, and when they hoped that there will one day be freedom and that their descendants would not be slaves. So I'm actually the manifestation and the physical embodiment of the dream of some captured African that now, as I practice medicine, as a highly educated person in this society, serving from that context of a social status that they couldn't even fathom or imagine, I would consider it a disrespect of that faith tradition of people who hoped against hope under austere circumstances to, in this moment, panic and to relinquish the work that I am called to do because of my faith. My sacred text tells me that faith without works is dead. If I say that I share the faith of my ancestors, it would be a dereliction of duty for me not to work for the justice that is enshrined in our living document of the Constitution, and to believe beyond that Constitution that there's a human right and a human decency rooted in the moral arc of the universe that Martin Luther King used to talk about. And sometimes, as I said last night, that arc is long and it bends towards justice, but it sometimes and often needs us to lean on it to push it in the direction that it's supposed to go.
Before America was ever a blessing to Africans, it was a beast and remained a beast, and to some place still remains a beast. So when we say, God bless America, land that I love, we're asking God to bless the regime that was a beast to us, and a bitter beast. we didn't have faith in the American God. We had faith in ourselves as slaves to survive the American God. But we're still sorting through this whole idea of the God of the oppressor and the country that oppressed us and has been raggedy in their treatment of us. Now, Wayman Tisdale and I sat in a yacht, a cruise ship that he had and his company had arranged. There were 2,000 people on there. He was having a jazz festival. It's his last. Dave Cos, all these guys were there. My wife, Gina, and I were his guests, sitting. Our suite was right next to his. And on the day that Obama was inaugurated, and he and I both had invitations to go, but we'd already booked this cruise. So we were sitting in the Caribbean waters in that beautiful, opulent suite of his, watching Barack Obama being sworn in. And I said, Raymond, 400 years ago, African slaves sat in nasty boats, laying in the bottom of the ship, chained, vomited, regurgitating, urinating, defecating in the bottoms of these hot, sweltering ships. They didn't even know where they were in the earth, couldn't even see. And we're sitting here in the Caribbean on a yacht that you have rented, and you're the leader. You're in the finest suite in the house. I'm sitting here with you. We're watching a black president from Africa be sworn into the regime that brought slaves over here. We started crying because we had come so far. But in that blessing of him now being able to hire this ship, Chaka Khan was on it. Here we are in this opulent surrounding. He died right after that. That was my last time being with him. We were saying this beast has become a blessing, and it's still awkward, and we now have a black president presiding over the beast.
I've really wondered, why would a Native Black American, as I'm learning to talk about African Americans who are descendants of slaves, be so loyal to the idea of this country for exactly the reasons you just named, right? For the extreme, consistent, ongoing, continuing today violence. So one answer would be because of the ideas written in that Constitution, the promise of freedom, right? The promise of justice. And I was thinking of Ruth Bader Ginsburg listening to both of you, because I think as a woman, that's what she represents. She did not know, she had no guarantee that the laws would change, right? That in the 1970s, a woman still couldn't get a credit card, couldn't get her own mortgage. But she knew in her cells that she was equal.
Yep.
And so she fought for that to change, right? So there's that inherent knowing we have that we're all one, that we're part of this one family, we're siblings, we're a brotherhood and sisterhood, but the laws don't reflect that, and our country is at war with itself in some ways, as you described with yourself, with these high ideals, but this underlying profit motive always betraying those values of sisterhood and brotherhood, right? So at what cost?
What makes it reasonable and rational for me to get up in the morning as a black man when I bear a 1 in 4 chance of going to jail, or at the mere interaction of a traffic stop, that it can escalate to me being shot and there can be no accountability around it? It would be absurd for me to get up when I know that's the case and to move in this society in the person of my body and in my spirit with any confidence that it is rational for me to move in any space in a white supremacist country. The substance and the evidence that I can do that is based on the faith that there's a Constitution that does enshrine and encode my humanity through a process of amendment, because it wasn't originally. And as Dr. King used to say, to help people to continue to believe in the civil rights movement, the moral arc is long, but it bends towards justice. And he says America is founded on justice, no matter how far she strays away from it. So my abiding belief is that there's a point of accountability based on the Constitution that all people are created equal, and that they have a right to appeal to grievance. And so I would say, in the spirit of the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Justice, when there was no reason for her to believe that women would be treated equally and could have a credit card to have their own mortgage or control their own reproduction, she continued to labor towards that, and it became so. The substance and the evidence of what she couldn't see came to fruition only because she had faith enough to continue to work. And so what I'm seeing in this moment why faith has to call us to guard against the cynicism that you referenced last night, Marlin. If we don't have a faith that is operative, that makes us work for the justice that the promise of which is held in the Constitution and other sacred documents worldwide, then we give in to nihilism.
Right, and it's why we always have to show up and fight for each other's freedom.
Absolutely.
And the reason I don't despair, even if our democracy in this country collapses, God forbid, the reason I don't despair is because I believe that indwelling in every human being on this planet is that awareness that that is the ultimate nature of God and the divine in us, right? That we are created equally, right, and that we all want to be free. Right. So that spark, that idea, that enlightenment idea that's expressed in the Constitution cannot be extinguished, right, by any demagogue, by any act of violence. So it will continue to arise as long as there's life. And listening to you and knowing the history of Black people in this land, you do re-inspire me to commit to the experiment that is taking place here on this land, because it does matter. It matters deeply. And it's a way of redeeming the suffering, right? To continue to fight for the embodiment of those ideals on this land. I have faith in both of you. I trust all of you, all three of you, because I witness with my own eyes that you are fighting not just for the freedom of people who have the same color skin, but you're fighting for everybody's liberation, right? Yeah. That you have this deep understanding of the oneness of all and everybody's dignity, and that we're all children of God, and that's part of your spirituality and your work in your faith, right? And you're leaving parts of the church behind, and you're challenging scripture and having doubts and being heretics, right? So you've pushed through to this faith that really does include everybody in God's love, and I trust that, right? So then that makes you kinfolk.
Creates the substance of a world worth working for.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
You work when you get compensated, you're working for something that you don't have in your possession at that moment. But your abiding trust is that you will receive the reward of the thing that you're working for. And that is the substance of the thing unseen, the Hebrew's definition of faith. And so the substance of me working for the world that I want to live in, one that is not caste ordered by race, sexual orientation, gender, or status, or class, that is the substance, even though people object as I work for that, because that is facts not in evidence in this moment. But in the grander scheme of things, in the moral arc, at the end that I see, the end of the movie that I see is, even if I'm not in the movie, is that there will be a world of people who are first and foremost primarily human, and they have dignity in their bones, and they have food in their belly, and they have adequate education. And that won't stratify by where you came from, what you look like, and who your folk are.
Yep.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Africans had to adjust to that. We're still adjusting to that because none of that stuff meant anything to us. You know, even the scriptures meant little to us because they read first, slaves, obey your masters. Right. That's the first stuff we heard. Stop believing in your African spiritualism because that's hexes and voodoo and juju, and believe in Jesus and rebuke your spirit, rebuke your background. So we've had to, Christianity has been a conflict for us. Christianity is considered faith, but the American Western faith was always conflicting to us and inflicting on us damage. So that we're Christians at all is still stunning.
This takes me to an interesting turn in the conversation. We're also in a universalist church, and you became a universalist by the name of Gospel of Inclusion, so that there's no hell. Now, universalism in the early days of America was a hard sell for African Americans, because how am I going to explain to African Americans that they're going to be in heaven? Because the idea was not just that there's no hell, but everybody's going to be in heaven. I'm not going to be in heaven with that slave driver and these other people.
Right.
So African Americans saying, I don't want to have anything to do with some religion that says everybody's going to be in heaven. And yet, you came to the understanding that there's no hell and have become universalistic in your theology. So I'm curious about your thoughts of how that's changed.
My detractors say, so are you saying that the police who shot the innocent, unarmed black man is going to heaven, Carlton Pearson? I say we all may be going through heaven, through hell, because we create both for ourselves based on the way we think. Does justice mean, it's not that I don't believe in punitive actions. I don't believe in eternal doom, eternal torture, eternal damnation, doomnation, condemnation. That doesn't make sense. There's nothing remedial, there's nothing corrective, there's nothing purgative, there's nothing loving or merciful. How can mercy endure forever? So we need justice, but not just us or just y'all. It's us. I mean, all of us together experiencing some accuracy in the way we think. We want an accurate judgment made with regard to these police officers in Kentucky right now. Those officers should need to be arrested and tried and convicted of something. And I don't want them tortured forever. Who's the gentleman that was in New York with the bird?
Oh yeah, the guy in the park.
Danny Parker. He said, "Don't destroy this lady.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's already punished. We see her face. She's going to carry that tag. Don't put her in prison." Now that's beauty to me. That's justice with mercy. The scripture says, "What doth the Lord require of thee, but that you love, that you
do justice,
that you
and
do
love mercy.
justice, love mercy, and walk humbly." The key thing there is loving mercy.
Yes.
If you don't love mercy, you're not going to do justice. If you don't love mercy, you're not going to walk humbly. So we need to learn how to fall in love anew with mercy.
Amen.
I like that.
I like that.
What we could be agnostic about is things that are beyond this realm.
Right.
But what we cannot be agnostic about is what constitutes justice and what constitutes mercy and what the human endeavor has to be towards that end.
Mm-hmm.
And faith that this is a just world, that this is a whether we have the manifestation of that is not, has to be the abiding faith, whether you're a person of religious faith or not. That's the only way you can honor the social contract.
So many people today are worried about reproductive justice and reproductive rights with the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Yeah. And I think that you think of your work as an abortion provider as merciful, as compassionate. Yes. But I think many other people see it a different way. Right. So I thought this beautiful exchange we just had might be an opening for you to explain to us why you see it as an act of mercy and compassion and supportive of all life and relationships in that respect and dignity of the woman.
Yes.
When women need reproductive control over their lives, and that decision requires the safe termination of a pregnancy, it has to happen in the context of the innate dignity of that woman and her humanity. My work is not heroic man work. It is fundamentally human rights work rooted in the notion that of the innate humanity of women and their right to reproductive control is rooted in their right to bodily autonomy. In the same way that we, as descendants of captured Africans, demanded that we be respected as whole human beings. Yeah. Yeah. You know, our humanity couldn't be given to us. Our humanity had to be, people had to be respected from depriving us of the right to practice our humanity. See, white supremacy cannot take the humanity of Black people or any non-white people who are oppressed by its presence. Only the people who practice white supremacy, they can forfeit their humanity.
Right.
Amen. Yeah.
So the task is not for, as we overthrow white supremacy, when we ask people who understand themselves as white to relinquish white supremacy, what we're inviting them to do is to restore the humanity that they've lost by participating in it.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's why I'm so passionate about the work we do in Rewire, because that's what it is. It's about white people learning to heal themselves and restore their own wholeness.
So a white person doesn't have anything to give me with regard to refusing to participate in white supremacy. We all become liberated when you understand the cost of participating in white supremacy to you.
Yes.
It is at the cost of your humanity, not mine, right?
Yes.
Because I'm asserting my humanity.
Yes,
Now, we've been killed for that, but we're in a moment now where people are understanding that, and that's why when we look in the streets, the people who are in the streets chanting Black Lives Matter are those people who at least in principle get the notion of what white supremacy is costing them as human beings.
Okay.
And I have faith that
We'll get there.
that work allows us to lean on the moral arc towards justice and that we can get there. If we consider the Constitution a living document and an expression of universal truth that
Yes.
happened to come through colonizing Europeans,
Yes.
it does not
But
belong
exists way beyond them.
to the white men
No, it does not
who
at all.
were
That's what I was trying to
conduits for
say.
it to come out.
Absolutely
and so
not. That's
one of the
exactly-
tasks, I think, in terms of restorative justice and corrective work is to be able to speak with integrity to people who are aggrieved
Yes.
or who've been the victims of being excluded from that document
Yes.
in its conception and who have now been amended in.
Yes.
How do you talk to First Nations people and help them to understand that they're in that document too?
You listen.
And that they don't,
You listen.
and that they don't conflate the origination of the originators of the document with the divine essence of the document. I'm not saying that the Constitution is holy text, but if there are universal truths contained in it and that we've articulated a vision of democracy, one of the best articulations of democracy in a pluralistic world, we don't have to throw that document out as corrupt. We can deal with it in all of its imperfections, and in the I think overly optimistic hope of the President Obama of a nation that is perfecting itself, a more perfect union. But there's a whole lot of stuff that we got to get rid of that is competing with that document.
Right.
But when you look at the theology of American Christianity and the images of God, Jesus is white.
I'm done with
Yeah.
And, you know, so historically that can't be true if Jesus was a Palestinian Jew.
Right.
So I like to joke with my friends that the greatest miracle of Jesus that Jesus ever performed wasn't to turn water into wine at Cana. It was to be a white man from Palestine.
Yeah. And conditioned thinking has stagnated this country and this culture. I can't blame white people for feeling a sense of superiority. I did as an evangelical Christian. We were the chosen people. We're the chosen country. We own Jesus. We own truth. We own the keys to the kingdom. We determine who goes to heaven and who doesn't. We have to decolonize the scriptures, decolonize the culture,
Yeah, and decolonize our minds.
and decolonize our consciousness. There are young people who are crowding these streets with Black Lives Matter signs, are a breed that has made the oldest black people believe that we've really come to a turning point. Because all these white people are lining the streets more than blacks, saying Black Lives Matter. You don't have the same feeling that I do when I see a white man with a sign, or a white teenager with a sign that says Black Lives, holding it up and screaming it out, and not one, and not 200 or 2,000 or 10,000, but literally hundreds of thousands of white Americans gives us hope in the future. This is powerful. It's affecting our faith.
Faith in this moment doesn't have to have anything to do with religious dogma.
I have to say this about you, Marlin, because I love you and I've known you for all these years, but there's been several peak times when you've just come through in an unusual way. And one time, this was probably 3 years ago, I went over to your house to pick you up for something. We were going someplace together. When I drove up to your front yard, you had a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard. And it's a completely white neighborhood. I thought, this Negro believes in what he's saying. I was so astounded at your character. I mean, you live it. This is in your spirit, because that was a very radical. I didn't have one in front of my house for a white man, and this is important. When non-black people stand for black people or people of color, the way that we're seeing it occur. And I hope all of our, particularly our All Souls members, recognize the virtue and the valor and the value of this kind of expression in the earth today. This is no small matter. I am deeply moved to stand out there in the parking lot with Black Lives Matter written in the parking lot when they're trying to paint over it on the north side where it belongs, on Greenwood Avenue, right where the beginning of the massacre occurred, that this church and 6 or 7 other non-black churches put it in their parking lot and are putting the mural that the city is saying take down on the north side, another slap in our face. We're an active church of faith. We're an active community of faith.
You know, you mentioned the Black Lives Matter sign, and you mentioned earlier, and I want to emphasize this, that white supremacy does not have the ability to take away the humanity of black people or any people, but it does have the ability to take away the humanity of white people. And so as I put that sign out in front of my home, I was not affirming your humanity, which doesn't need my affirmation.
Gotcha. Wow.
But I was affirming my own humanity.
Wow. Marlin, that's beautiful.
This is a heavy conversation.
This is, well, and we are out of time, but I do really appreciate all of you taking the time, and especially you, Dr. Parker, who flew in here and made the point of being with us and being a part of this congregation and this conversation.
You are a blessing. Come home to church. This is coming. I just came home. Come on home.
And thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Bishop Pearson, Carlton.